Hi, Megan.
Hi, Stuart. So today we are going to discuss the Joan Rivers case. I've been reading about that a lot lately, and I was wondering if you could answer a few questions about it that I had. First of all, would that be a medical malpractice case?
Absolutely. In fact, Joan Rivers' daughter is pursuing a medical malpractice case because what happened when Joan Rivers died was that she was getting an endoscopy to have her throat examined. She was having constant sore throat problems and other problems, and I think it's her gastroenterologist, a very well-known gastroenterologist, was doing an endoscopy where a tube with a camera and perhaps other devices is um, uh, put down the throat so the doctor can visualize what's going on and, if need be, do some sort of procedure. Um, we're gonna keep rolling, but we're gonna start this again.
Okay.
All right, and we'll edit it later.
Yeah.
Um, because my phone was continuing to ring.
Oh,
So, all right, so let's just start again, and we'll have Tiffany edit this.
okay.
So I'm going to start by saying, hi, Megan. I'm going to start again. Hi,
Okay.
Megan. How are you?
I'm good, Stuart. How are you?
Good. So today we're going to talk about the Joan Rivers, the unfortunate death of Joan Rivers, and how that relates to a potential malpractice case, correct? You were asking me some questions about that before we went live.
hmm
So,
I
anything
was
else you want to discuss regarding that, or should I just jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering why it would be a medical malpractice case and what exactly goes on for someone to be able to make something into a malpractice case.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. Well, very briefly, what happened with Joan Rivers, she was being examined by a gastroenterologist in a clinic under anesthesia for a throat problem. And she also had her primary care physician there in the room, in the evaluation room, while she was under general anesthesia. And she died due to various complications, which are a little more involved than is kind of necessary for this conversation. But basically, some of the shortcomings of what happened were that her throat closed up, and her heart was not able to pump properly, and she suffered a cardiac arrhythmia, and she died. Now, what could have been done to save her life would have been a simple tracheotomy. I'm not sure, based on the news reports or anything else that has come out since, whether the doctors actually performed a tracheotomy, but those are the types of things that could have possibly prevented her death. But there were some serious violations that happened in the clinic that clearly led to her death. First of all, there was a gastroenterologist who was performing the procedure, which is an endoscopy, which is a procedure where a tube is put down the patient's throat with a camera so the doctor can see what's going on in the throat and diagnose what's going on. And her primary care physician was also in the operating room or the procedure room at the time. That violates a whole bunch of rules, and it violated the rules of the facility itself. So that primary care physician was not licensed to be there at the time, and in addition, as an aside, the primary care physician actually took a picture of herself with Joan Rivers on the primary care physician's cell phone before the problem started. So there were some things going on during the procedure that clearly should not have been going on, and ultimately led to Joan Rivers' death. It's a malpractice case because it was certainly an unexpected event, and Joan Rivers did not consent to some of the things that were going on, particularly having her primary care physician in the room. And in fact, the reports indicate that the primary care physician herself performed part of the test, part of the procedure, and that was clearly not consented to by the patient and would have been beyond protocol. So it certainly is a malpractice case, and it is clearly a death that could have been and should have been prevented. That's the point number one.
Okay. So I was just watching your more recent video about the difference between medical malpractice and medical negligence. And can you explain a little bit why this would fall under malpractice more so than negligence?
Yes. All medical malpractice cases are the result of medical negligence. So what the public generally is not aware of, and we see it and hear it all the time because we get calls from people who either they have suffered from a medical negligence situation or their family members have, and the vast majority of medical negligence cases are turned down by me and by lawyers that handle medical malpractice cases. And what that means is that in order to proceed with a medical malpractice case, not only must there be medical negligence, which we may or may not be able to prove in any given case because there's many defenses to medical negligence, but there also has to be damages, and that goes to the Joan Rivers case. So in order to prove a viable medical malpractice case, you first have to have clear medical malpractice, meaning the medical provider did something wrong and violated what's called the standard of care, which is a fancy way of saying they did something wrong and they did something that led to an injury. And the injury that the patient suffered from generally has to be a very severe, if not catastrophic, injury. And the reason is because medical malpractice cases are extremely difficult to prove and very expensive to prove. So just because medical negligence occurred does not mean it gives rise to a viable, provable medical malpractice case. Now, in the Joan Rivers situation, she was 81 years old when she died. The typical drivers of a medical malpractice case, once you get past the medical negligence aspect of the case and can prove that the medical provider did something wrong that led to an injury, one of the main drivers is what are the lost earnings or lost earning potential or lost earning capacity of the injured plaintiff by way of some catastrophic injury or death. So typically an 81-year-old person would not have an extensive lost wage or lost earning capacity, meaning earnings into the future of his or her lifetime. But obviously with someone like Joan Rivers, who was working, as a comedian, working in in Hollywood, as it were, she was earning substantial funds. So, and I don't know what her earnings were, but over the course of 1 year, she had substantial earnings. So she could have anticipated that, in her 82nd year, her 83rd year, her 84th year, etc. And that's, along with the pain and suffering aspect of the case, in a typical medical malpractice case, the driver of the value of the case is earnings that were lost. So again, an 81-year-old might not typically have a large lost earnings claim, but Joan Rivers did, and that's why the value of her medical malpractice case is so high. So it's very interesting. It's a unique type of case, but when a celebrity is injured or dies as a result of someone else's negligence, assuming you can prove negligence, the value of the case is driven by earnings.
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah, it's a very interesting part of the law. It's something that we have to prove in every negligence case. But again, in a medical malpractice case, that's typically one of the things we look for. So in a younger worker, younger employee of, say, a construction company, for instance, if he or she is injured in a negligence case and can't return to work, the driver of the value is earnings over his or her lifetime. If it's a medical negligence case that leads to a provable medical malpractice case, one of the driving forces between for us to prove what's the value is what is that person's earnings over a lifetime. So even if that person didn't earn Joan Rivers types of earnings, you can see how that can add up over 35 years or 25 years of additional earnings. It can be an enormous amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyhow, that's sort of the sum and substance of why Joan Rivers' daughter is pursuing the medical malpractice case. Clearly something went wrong. They violated their own rules at the clinic where she had this done. It was an unexpected death. She shouldn't have died, and it leads to a malpractice case, not just because they violated the standard of care, meaning the doctors did, and they were negligent, but the value of her earnings equates to injuries and damages beyond just beyond just the fact that she died. So that's how we prove medical malpractice cases in Pennsylvania.
So you can say with some confidence that Melissa Rivers will probably win her case.
Absolutely. I mean, she definitely will make she will be compensated for the loss of her mother due to the negligence of the doctors. And I believe that this happened in New York, so the laws are very similar in New York as compared to Pennsylvania, and the driving forces behind value, as I just discussed, are quite similar.
All right. Very interesting. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
You're welcome, Megan, and until next time, thanks for joining me on this hangout.
Thank you.